President, honourable members, last Friday it was International Anti-Corruption Day. On this day, of all days, Belgian authorities carried out searches on several addresses in Brussels. As of last evening, 20 searches have been carried out. On suspicion of involvement in organised crime, corruption and money laundering. They filed charges against 4 people, including 1 former member of this Parliament and a Vice President of the European Parliament. The investigations cover a wider network. They confiscated computers, smartphones and over €500,000 in cash. We do not yet know what the results of this investigation will be, but one thing is clear. There must be zero tolerance for corruption. Corruption is a very serious crime that undermines our democracy, our economy, our society. I applaud the Belgian police and the Belgian authorities for the decisive action in this criminal investigation and for showing that prosecution and the law enforcement system work. And I applaud the officials and members of this House who are fully assisting this investigation. And I thank President Metsola for your personal support of the investigation, your decisive action, your resolve to meet this test and have the Parliament come out stronger. The allegations are extremely serious. The investigations are still ongoing and there is a presumption of innocence. But to anyone accepting payoffs, kickbacks, bribes, I say, shame on you. Shame on you for violating trust. The trust of the people of Europe who expect you to fight for their interest, not your own. And for violating the trust of your colleagues here in the Parliament who work very hard, honourably, truthfully, with decency. The only way we can rebuild trust is to fully support investigations, for the guilty to be brought to justice, and for us to root out corruption anywhere we find it. As President von der Leyen said in her State of the Union speech 3 months ago in this chamber, corruption erodes trust. We must fight back with the full force of the law. And that's what we must do every day. Our anti-fraud office, OLAF, investigates fraud and corruption in the institutions. The European Public Prosecutor's Office fights crimes against the EU budget. We have a strong rule of law mechanism to help all member states fight corruption with annual monitoring and reporting, and now also clear recommendations. We set up a general law conditionality mechanism to make sure no money from the EU budget goes into corrupt pockets. We took steps to make sure no cent of COVID recovery money ends up in the wrong hands. The fight against corruption is central to our strategy against organised crime and a key target of European police cooperation under EMPACT. As a union, we need to learn the hard lessons and take responsibility, ensuring that we have better mechanisms and accountability in place. Get rid of differences in national laws that obstruct the fight against corruption. That's why I, next year, will propose a new law. We must criminalise all forms of corruption in all member states. Not just bribery, as is the case today, but also trafficking in influence, illicit enrichment, embezzlement and abuse of power, and to impose tough EU-wide criminal penalties for these crimes. The Commission continues to support an EU ethics body for all European institutions, for the Parliament, Council, for the European Court of Justice, the ECB, the European Court of Auditors, and also its advisory bodies, the European Economic and Social Committee and the Committee of the Regions, without exception. So we can all live by the same clear principles, live up to the same high standards. President von der Leyen sent a letter to these institutions in March, and Vice President Jourova is carrying the discussions with our partners forward. Let me be clear. The scandal we discuss here today goes well beyond ethics violations. It's a serious criminal investigation. The Parliament's first response is the right one, to cooperate fully with the law enforcement. But there is anger and frustration in this House and outside. There is understandable outrage and frustration among the millions who believe in the European project, who saw the European unity helped us through the pandemic and helps us now in response to Putin's war. We built trust based on action, and now we must rebuild. The fight against corruption is mission critical for Europe, and we must have our own house in order first. Our standards should always be the highest. It's what we expect of others, and we must demand it for ourselves. Thank you.
Herzlichen Dank, Frau Kommissarin.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Thank you for the clarity of your intervention and your statement.
Ich danke Ihnen für die Klarheit Ihrer Ausführungen.
Thank you once again for the clarity and the assessment that you've made of the situation. And with only one vote against, Madam Kaili is now removed as Vice President of this House. Mr. Jeroen Lenaers now.
Colleagues, it's really hard to express how sad and angry I am here today, because the greed of some individuals in this House has cast a dark shadow over all of us, and I have to fully agree with the Commissioner. Shame on them. The news over the past days looked like a bad Netflix film. Bags of cash, raided offices and searched houses. But it's not a film. It's the ugly truth of high-level corruption at the heart of the European democracy. And of course, investigations are ongoing and we need to wait for all the facts. But already I would like to thank the Belgian authorities, and I would also like to thank our President, Roberta Metsola, for her leadership on this issue and echo her words. There will be no impunity, none. Those responsible must be brought to justice. And we fully support the internal investigation that the President announced. We must do better, increased transparency and accountability of all activities related to third countries, whether through NGOs or other actors, and strengthen defensive tools and anti-corruption measures to combat foreign interference in our work. All these steps are necessary to start regaining the trust of our citizens, because make no mistakes, the action of those who rather take home bags of cash than bags of work, they undermine the credibility of all of us, and it is up to us together to repair the damage. And we can already see the Orbáns of this world gloating about these developments, apparently under the impression that corruption elsewhere makes corruption at home less disgusting. Nonsense. And let me emphasize one crucial difference. In stark contrast to the impunity in Orbán's Hungary, in a rule of law, corrupt individuals are arrested, prosecuted and stripped of their responsibilities. And we say very clearly here today, no tolerance for corruption, no tolerance for impunity. Thank you.
Herzlichen Dank. Das Wort
Thank you very much. And now, the President of the S&D Group, Madam Garcia Perez.
Thank you, President. Madam Commissioner, ladies and gentlemen, this Parliament has always worked and will continue to work for democracy, rule of law and transparency. We've always fought against corruption in all its forms, and we will continue doing so, but we recognise that we have to do better. Corruption destroys institutions, undermines the confidence of citizens, and damages the political image. We cannot allow this because we're here to serve our citizens. Notwithstanding our ideological differences, I'm very proud of the reaction of this House when faced with this horrible scandal of corruption that unfortunately has taken place in the Parliament. Having said that, there are some key points to make. First of all, those responsible are the people that broke the law, that committed serious crimes that they were aware of, and the full force of the law needs to fall on them. And then I've already announced that my group will also be involved in any court case. Now, we have to say that, in fact, the fact that there is a criminal investigation underway proves that rule of law does work, and we will do everything we can to cooperate with the investigation so that all facts are known. My responsibility as group leader is to ensure that any negative impact that could happen from what these people have done will be counteracted, both in the group and elsewhere. We will be acting firmly. We will be carrying out an internal investigation. We acted firmly from the outset to protect the honourability of the Social Democrat group as well as this Parliament, because criminal behaviour of a few individuals cannot undermine the everyday work done by the immense majority of MEPs and their staff and assistants. And we have to set up, I think, a committee of inquiry in the European Parliament because, apart from this criminal behaviour, we have to know what internal mechanisms can be improved to ensure that we do not see a situation like this again. We want maximum clarity and transparency, taking into account that the legal investigation has not concluded. The most important is that that continues and that all the facts are known. Over the next weeks, we are going to have to discuss concrete measures, such as the timeframe and mandate for the Committee of Inquiry, the need to include third countries on the transparency register for lobbies, or the creation of an independent ethics body. It must be clear to citizens, this House is transparent. It belongs to you all, and this awful episode will never happen again. This House needs to be an open house to all of those who want to contribute to building a united Europe, a fairer Europe, because our work is worth it, because it is worth working for Europe, even on days as sad as this one, and it is worth working for a Europe where we are all working together. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Madam Sophia Interveld from the Renew Group.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Colleagues, shock, disbelief, anger. I believe we all went through the roller coaster last weekend as bit by bit we learned about the corruption scandal that took place in our midst. And we are still reeling, or at least that's the way I feel. We're all devastated to see how the criminal acts of members, former members and staff of the European Parliament have deeply damaged the image of this House. And it is our task to restore and even strengthen trust. We have a saying in Dutch, trust arrives on foot and leaves on horseback. In other words, it takes a long time to build trust, but it's broken very rapidly. Taking influence on political decision-making is in itself a normal and healthy part of democracy. Let's not forget that. As a matter of fact, it is democracy. And MEPs must be accessible and open to arguments and debate. They must be able to freely and independently be the voice of their constituents and vote in line with their own views and beliefs. But it's a very different matter if actors are trying to get influence with undue pressures or even bribes. And the ugly facts that have emerged are not a mere breach of ethics, colleagues, but criminal acts. And we can fortunately conclude that the criminal justice system works. Now, let's use this momentum and revise and strengthen the rules on ethics and transparency nevertheless. There is already a number of proposals on the table, like finally setting up an ethics body with teeth and expanding the transparency register to include third country representatives. and much more. And we can learn from the best practices from other parliaments. This House, colleagues, must and can become the gold standard for integrity and transparency. And it is our joint cross-party task to restore trust. Thank you.
Danke, Frau Kollegin. Zu Wort.
Thank you very much, colleague. Our next speaker is colleague Reintke from the Greens.
Ich glaube, wir sind alle immer noch
Thank you. I think we're all still horrified by what emerged in the weekend. And my father had some fairly strong words about it. I think it shows that trust has been broken and we can only reconstruct trust if we act in the European Parliament. We've got to be very clear in the resolution that we adopt that we have to speak out against what's happened and the consequences thereof. And a clear reaction to corruption is central. We've taken the first steps today in having stripped Eva Kalias of her office as Vice President. Corruption must have consequences, full stop, no discussion. We need full investigation and, of course, we need full cooperation with the Belgian authorities because they've shown that there is a free and independent judiciary in Belgium. And something that's very important is that we take measures to prevent this in the future. And there are things that you can't prevent, even with better rules of transparency, but nevertheless, we must focus on full transparency, for example, including third countries in the lobby register. And some colleagues are going to say that we shouldn't rush our fences, we shouldn't react immediately, but there are a lot of rules which we've already adopted by majority here in the plenary as the rules of ethics, and we should continue to implement this because this is not a new discussion, it's just come to the fore again. And I think that through this discussion we've got to keep in our minds that we need to reconstruct the faith in the Parliament with the citizens. That's got to be the main point. Thank you. Mr. Wunderbella.
Merci, Monsieur le Président, Madame la Commissaire.
Thank you very much. The religion of human rights ends where the religion of money starts. We've always tried to moralize, and we've always tried to lecture to other countries, and now we're in the middle of a scandal involving an Islam's country. This brings to the end the masquerade which claims that Europe is a great thing, the ones who shout loudest about democracy. We have people here in Parliament who are suspected of getting money from Qatar. Qatar is an Islamist country. There's no rights of women. There's no right of workers. Homosexuality is sentenced to the death penalty. This is a country where thousands of people died building the arenas for the World Cup. And the players, sportswomen have to wear a veil. They sponsor the jihadists in Syria and in France. According to France Bruno, the Muslim Brotherhood has been funded to the extent of 25,000 euros over the last years in setting up schools and so on and so forth. How many of the MEPs are prepared to sell out to the highest bidder? How many have the same views? We don't want our countries to be sold to the highest bidder. We have to shed light on the links of MEPs with Qatar, and I'm sure there are other skeletons in cupboards. This is just the beginning on the subject of Qatar, and another subject we have said for a long time, we have to impose a respect for Europe for everybody. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, our colleague Asita Kanko has the floor. President, ladies and gentlemen, corruption, money laundering, so much cash that it took the whole night to count it all up. We're not talking about drugs gangs or the mafia. We're talking about members of this parliament and their staff. I'm angry just like everybody else. I'm disappointed that there's so much egoism here. Lack of respect for democracy and our citizens. Why don't they go to Qatar? Why don't they move there if they want to represent Qatar? Because they know we have rules under the rule of law here. The rule of law are things that we need to cherish, not undermine them. Qatar has undermined the confidence in our institutions and the rule of law. This situation, these circumstances, these revelations are demanding at the same time that we in this House look into what's happened, we investigate this and how we can make sure we avoid this in the future. Our institutions have to act quickly and effectively to make sure that we regain confidence here. Rules of integrity and ethics have to be tightened up. Lobby rules need to be revised when it comes to third country actors. We have to have effective implementation of the rules. This is not Club Med in the European Parliament. To get rid of the parliamentary delegations, we know that they're worthless, and the committees can actually cover that work. This investigation has to be carried out properly so that everybody knows that the people who are trying to buy others or the people who are corrupt will never remain without impunity. That is what decent working members of the community and of this parliament expect.
Thank you very much. And now for the left, Martin Scherdewan.
Vielen Dank, Herr Präsident.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Many people are currently facing problems. People are struggling to bring their shopping home. And yet here we've got members of this House with suitcases full of cash trundling through the town. It's very difficult to know the scale of the current situation, but what we need is total cooperation with the authorities to uncover the facts and to make sure that the transparency rules of this House are respected. My group calls for a committee to get to the bottom of what has happened. We need total openness and transparency. Is it normal for states and companies to buy influence on European policy? This is a major blow to the credibility of European politics. Quite clearly, political decisions by this House have been paid for, and there are members of this House who let themselves be bought. We're not talking here about a few bad apples. This scandal has happened because we have a structural problem. How many lobbyists had access to the European Parliament over the past year? How many meetings were there between lobbyists and commissioners and commission officials? How much do we really know about the influence of lobbyists and states on our institution and others? We need an independent ethics commission and total transparency in legislative work. Otherwise, this scandal is going to tarnish the EU for a long time to come. Thank you. Thank you very much. Next, Laura Ferrara. You have the floor.
Thank you very much. The scandal stemming from the serious suspicions of corruption from Qatar has tarnished the image of the European Parliament, casting a shadow on it, and it is jeopardizing people's trust in our institution. We have to cooperate with justice in order to defend the credibility and the honor of the Parliament, which is the house of all Europeans and European democracy. We have to make sure we get to the bottom of this and make sure we find out what the truth is and that everyone is held accountable. And I'd like to thank President Metsola for everything she's done. We have to make sure that we don't give in to any act of interference, attack, corruption, and so on that undermines decision-making and democracy. The Five-Star Movement shares the fact that we should postpone the vote on waiving visa rules for Qatar and Kuwait. We have to make sure that it becomes mandatory to have a register which reflect MEPs meeting lobbyists and foreign diplomats. We cannot tolerate those who jeopardize the credibility of the representatives and European democracy. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And next we'll hear from David McAllister.
Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, trust in our Parliament's integrity and the rule of law are paramount for the functioning of European democracy. The European Parliament must conduct a policy of zero tolerance towards corruption. For this reason, I am appalled that 4 people closely connected to the European Parliament, including one of its vice presidents, were arrested by the Belgian authorities on suspicions of money laundering, corruption and participating in a criminal organization. I very much welcome President Roberta Metzola's leadership, her words yesterday here in this hemicycle. I welcome her initiative to launch an internal investigation and a wide-ranging reform process in order to increase transparency and to fight corruption. It is important that we now draw the right conclusions. Colleagues, the European Parliament cannot assume the role of a court and does not intend to prejudice ongoing investigations. Yet I congratulate the relevant Belgian and further European authorities on thwarting further criminal actions through their work. Parliament should fully support the ongoing criminal investigation. For any foreign actor proven guilty in this ongoing case, there must also be swift and dissuasive consequences. The European Parliament needs to strengthen our anti-corruption mechanisms as well as defensive tools to combat foreign interference. Let me fully underline what colleagues have said. For time reasons, just let me add one additional point. In this case, a non-governmental organization was allegedly used, or to be more precise, misused, as vector of foreign interference in our political work. Therefore, we should also have a look at existing regulations in order to increase transparency and accountability of organizations and other actors. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Pedro Marques.
Thank you very much, President, Commissioner. The accusations of corruption, the data that's already made available, are some of the worst things we've ever seen in this institution. As far as I'm concerned, I was outraged from the very start, and I get angrier and angrier for every new revelation that we have to take note of. I'm proud that my group has acted already, in fact, acted quickly, and that this Parliament acted quickly, and that this member, Eva Kaili, was thrown out of our group and stripped of her office of Vice President of Parliament. But the confidence of citizens in our institution has been damaged. And within the framework of how we can act, we have to make sure that we understand that we have been damaged as well. The investigation committee needs to get to the bottom of things. It's important to take measures to make sure that we prevent ourselves from being attacked in a similar way in the future. It's important to protect European democracy, as so many people have already said. That takes a long time to build up that level of confidence, and we've lost it in the blink of an eye. We have to change this situation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Adrián Vázquez Látara.
Thank you very much, President. Madam Commissioner, This week, the European Parliament has grabbed the headlines of half the world, but unfortunately not because of the action that we take to help citizens. It's about third countries that may have bought MEPs in a legitimate way. This isn't just a head-on attack against the Parliament, but also the values that inspire it. But democracy and rule of law are a lot stronger than some may think. To those who are corrupt, to those who corrupted, to those who have allowed themselves to be corrupted, I'll say one thing: they're going to catch you all, and you're going to pay for it sooner or later, because here the rule of law works. And a few rotten apples aren't going to make the rest go rotten. It is our responsibility. It's not going to be straightforward to give back the European Parliament the image and reputation it deserves, but we'll do so, whatever it takes.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Jordi Soler. You have the floor.
Gracias, President.
Thank you very much. The shadow of corruption is hanging over us and has tarnished the image of the European Parliament, but this threat isn't new. We already had suspicions that some autocratic regimes might have been trying to meddle in the work of this Parliament through illicit means. I said this in 2017 through an amendment adopted by the Parliament, asking for strong measures to avoid such corruption that would undermine the legitimacy and credibility of the work of the European Parliament. And that was a quote. But we didn't do anything. And now the suspicions have turned into criminal charges. I hope that we will act now and take specific action, such as setting up an independent ethics committee with real powers, with real teeth, because we also have to bear in mind that even with stringent rules, whether there's corruption or not, it all depends on our sense of democratic responsibility and ethics. We cannot take any excuses when it comes to corruption. We've got to try and ask ourselves questions and look at ourselves in the mirror. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is Anna Bonfrisco. You have the floor.
Grazie, Presidente.
Thank you very much, President. Qatar Gate involves NGOs, trade unions, individuals, MEP assistants, and MEPs. This is the most serious political attack on our democracy. We're talking about autocratic third countries that have carried out these attacks, and this is the most serious attack since the beginning of EU institutions. We are very critical when it comes to Qatar and the enemies of democracy that are a threat from the outside. And we put a parliamentary question. It was Mrs. Ciccardi who put this question and reflected these concerns. However, I think we have to try and stand united. This is extremely important to produce the antibodies that we need to protect our society, and freedom and democracy are vital in order to protect the presumption of innocence. We've got the rule of law, and we all believe in that. We can speculate against some members. However, we feel bitterness because we've been excluded from the democratic process of the European Parliament, and because we want to be constructive opposition, which is necessary. Many of you have used the cordon sanitaire against us, but this was a tragic mistake. Given this disaster, let me repeat what we said, we're going to stand united to defend European institutions and European citizens.
Thank you very much. Next speaker, Nicola Procaccini.
Presidente.
Thank you very much. It was said that corruption isn't something that comes from the right or the left. I agree with this statement, but I wonder whether our colleagues from the left agree with this. I fear that's not the case, because for years we've been hearing them put forward the myth of their moral superiority, and this false and hypocritical narrative was reflected in the speeches of some group leaders. The most disgusting aspect of this scandal is actually reflected in the words that were uttered here 1 month ago, saying that Doha was a staunch supporter of democracy and human rights. Now we understand these comments a little bit more, but that's not why I'm mentioning it. It's because the left seems to think that it is in a position to decide who is on the side of history and who isn't. And we've even been told that the West could learn a lot from Qatar when it comes to freedom and rights. This pervasive opinion is the best ally of repression and corruption. We have a question to ask ourselves, and not just in this chamber. Why is an Islamic regime why have they decided to pay off MEPs and invest so much money in the most popular sport in the world? They're not looking for economic profits or a rate of return. They are buying up our culture, our way of living. Everyone knows this, but very few are fighting against it.
Ďakujem veľmi pekne.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Konstantinos Arvanitis. You have the floor.
Αγαπητοί συνάδελφοι,
Ladies and gentlemen, we can all feel the stab in the back of our mutual trust, or our European Parliament, democracy and the rule of law. But it is of no value to just focus on the findings, even though they are shocking. I feel that we need to adopt measures in order to make sure that we restore the prestige and substance of the institution. When it comes to criminal liability, justice will decide, but we have to assume our political responsibility, and that will be reflected in the resolution tomorrow. We would like to see an independent ethics committee set up with investigation and enforcement powers that will cover all institutions. We want to bolster the current rules on transparency. We want a transparency register that will be legally binding and mandatory. We want a mandatory legislative footprint for MEPs that write reports and opinions. We want a revised code of conduct with more stringent rules for MEPs and staff, especially when it comes to gifts and services. We need to look at the whole issue of waiving immunity when they are members of a criminal organization. We've got Mr. Lagos, who's in prison, but he's still getting a salary. And now we have to put an end to the whole story of former MEPs. Their term has come to an end, and we thank them very much. Let us put an end to this, the comings and goings here in the European Parliament. Thank you.
Ďakujem veľmi pekne.
Thank you very much. Next, we're going to hear from Gilbert Collard.
Monsieur le Président, mes chers collègues.
Mr. President, colleagues, the question is there a fifth column of corruption in the European Union? Yes, there is. And what is to be done? NGOs like Fight Impunity, fighting impunity is indeed what we have to do. Panzeri is former chair of the Subcommission on Human Rights. The human rights is a scandal, and I think we need to get to the bottom of this, and von der Leyen's SMSs. The next speaker is Sven Simon.
Mr. President, colleagues, let me start by congratulating the Belgian authorities and our services on stopping this plot to undermine European democracy. The silver lining in this case is that our systems were tested and prevailed. But it is true. European democracy is under attack by countries who seek to undermine our decision-making processes. It is a shame that a few colleagues, former colleagues and staff, went along with this. The vector of attack in this case appears to be an NGO, and for too long we have turned a blind eye on the lobbying efforts of supposedly non-governmental actors. What we need is a Foreign Agents Registration Act modeled on the example in the United States. This means full transparency of who is funding which NGO, their governance structures, budgets, and persons of significant control. Members who have taken money from NGOs have conflicts of interests. It's not so important which NGO or lobby group. And they should recuse themselves immediately from working in respective policy fields. As European People's Party, we want to restore trust in the functioning of our institutions, and we need to act now, not with political games, but with concrete actions. Thank you.
Ďakujem veľmi pekne a ďalšia.
Thank you. Gabriele Bischoff is next.
Kolleginnen und Kollegen,
Ladies and gentlemen, I think it's become clear that this week is a tough week for all of us. I've seldom seen so many feelings coming to the surface, so much anger, so much disappointment, and also so many people who've genuinely shaken. But this attack, which is an attack on our democracy, which is an attack on the credibility of our institution, is still something that demands that we go beyond those feelings. We've taken the first step in great unity. And I'd like to thank Ylva Johansson, the Commissioner, for the clear words that she spoke here, because we as an institution, I think, will have to work closely together, more closely together, to act against this corruption, against these criminals. That's why it is correct that, for example, we should establish an ethics body for all institutions. I'm pleased that the Commissioner and the Commission President support this. We need to bring the Council around to that. We need to make sure that we do our own homework in terms of these jobs, and we're going to deal with this as of the new year to try and win back the faith that we've lost. Thank you.
Ďakujem veľmi pekne. Ďalšia vystúpi.
Thank you. The next speaker is Hilde Woutmans.
Thank you, President. Commissioner, with the decision that we took today to strip the vice presidentship from Eva Kaili, we have sent out a very strong signal today. Europe is not for sale. Never. And it was a very important signal because this corruption scandal has struck at the heart of our European Parliament, of our European project. When it comes to Qatar, and I think everybody here knows this, we need to send this back. And we start with the visa-free travel. We need to make sure that we carry out an appropriate investigation. The Belgian authorities have done outstanding work. But, colleagues, this is only the start. We have to have full transparency of all lobby contacts within and out with the European Parliament, and look how the other European institutions deal with this as well, because we need to push for a broader approach. We need to have recommendations from the Parliament's Committee on Foreign Interference and implement their recommendations. We need to look at how we can have a coordinated approach at European level and have a genuine committee of inquiry. These incidents happen, but we need to counter them on the basis of vision, of conviction, not on the basis of money in your bank account. Let this be a lesson.
Ďakujem veľmi pekne a ďalšia vystúpi pani Hanna Neumann.
Next is Hanna Neumann.
We have all been elected to represent European citizens and entrusted to protect European democracy. And that is the very foundation of our mandate, and it is so across party lines. And colleagues, until last Friday, I was pretty sure that the dissent that we have, the debates that are sometimes hard, but always at the core of democratic decision-making, were based on political opinions, on different political opinions, and not on suitcases full of money. And this trust now is deeply shaken. We are all standing in the middle of a crime scene with offices sealed, colleagues in prison, confronted with the allegation that at least one of us has become a Trojan horse of corruption and foreign interference.
And I have no illusions. Autocratic regimes have tried to bribe us before, and they will continue to do so in the future. And that is why I want this inquiry committee of the Parliament to know more, to know better what has happened more, to better prevent it in the future, and yes, to build trust again. Our response to this scandal, dear colleagues, has to be clear, to the inside as well as the outside. We are not for sale, and nor is European democracy.
Ďakujem veľmi pekne. Ďalší vystúpi.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Nikolaus Fest.
Yes, thank you, Mr. President. Wir haben hier nicht nur ein Problem mit korrupten Abgeordneten. Wir haben
It's not just a problem of corrupt members. We've got corrupt NGOs as well. One of them had founded Fight Impunity, the other Secretary General of No Peace Without Justice. Both NGOs had practically the same address. This is a gateway to corruption, this kind of structure. Interpol is warning about the role of NGOs in money laundering. The German intelligence service is warning about the systematic financing of left-wing NGOs by Qatar and other countries. Corruption has been around for a long time in this House because there is no political scrutiny. In the senior bodies of this House, nothing's going to change because they're in the hands of the left. Thank you. The next speaker is Jadwiga Wiśniewska. Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, Ms. García Pérez was talking about safeguarding the honor of socialists and Democrats. Yet the S&D has for years been trampling on the honor of Poland in full disregard of the facts. I wonder, those unwarranted attacks on Poland, were they paid for by somebody? This scandal demonstrates the hypocrisy and double standards in this House that cannot be tolerated. And it's not just in this House, it's also in the European Commission, and the European Commission will have to tackle this problem. We therefore need a commission with representatives of the member states to monitor how the European institutions are working. Lobbying will have to be watched particularly closely. Lobbying and high-level corruption, not just from Qatar, but also from Russia. For example, Nord Stream, climate policy, there's an obvious need for greater member state control over the activities of the EU institutions. Thank you very much.
Ďakujem veľmi pekne.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Mr. Mark Botenga.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, President, Commissioner. 1.5 million euros recovered. All sorts of offices searched. Offices sealed, even in this Parliament. Obviously just the tip of the iceberg. Every time we put forward an idea of reducing the income of members, you reply, no, you have to pay them well because otherwise they'll be corrupted. Well, obviously that's been going in a loop for years now because it obviously isn't working. MEPs who are illegally corrupt by Qatar is one thing that is bad enough. But MEPs being legally influenced through revolving doors, seats on boards and such like is also serious in Dutch. This is a problem with money culture. There's almost no transparency, a culture of impunity in Transparency International mentions this, and the high levels of salaries mean that members have lost their grip on reality. They'd rather live with the bourgeoisie rather than as normal people. It's high time that politicians earn a decent wage and not take money away from others.
Ďakujem veľmi pekne a ďalší vystúpi.
Thank you very much. Next speaker is Tomáš Deutsch.
Az Európai Unió
The history of the European Union shows the gravest corruption scandal. The Brussels corruption undermines the whole credibility of every institution. It is obvious and clear that the left wing's anti-corruption narrative is a cheap lie. Kylie, Parley, Verhofstadt or Sarvamaa, the transparency narratives of these members of parliament are only to cover up for the Brussels corruption. It was a thief who was calling for the police, as like in this story, because you, based on political lies, day by day, shame national governments for corruption and want to penalize national governments. Meanwhile, the Brussels corruption is obviously rampant, and it seems to be the norm, part of the system, together with politicians and NGOs that are part of this plot. Brussels has lost all of its credibility. With this scandal, you cannot name and shame others for corruption anymore.
Ďakujem veľmi pekne.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Helen Fritzon.
Thank you, President, Commissioner. I'm also both shocked and angry that it seems like there is corruption in this public elected parliament. That doesn't just harm our European Parliament as an institution. It also damages politics. It damages politics in general, but it damages democracy. And I would like to express a vote of thanks to Ylva Johansson for your very clear words. And yes, they ought to be ashamed. Those who've committed the crimes obviously should be brought to book. But at the same time, we have to assume our responsibility in the European Parliament, in the EU's institutions. We need to carry out reforms which strengthen transparency and openness. And we have to have a system in place where our citizens have trust in what we're doing. They have to have faith in our institutions. They have to be able to have confidence in us. Let us use our anger that we now feel to make sure that this never happens again in our parliament. Thank you.
Madam Fritzon, if you can perhaps stay, because Mr. Weimers has asked for a blue card to intervene. You have the floor.
Herr talman.
President, yes, in November, Helen Fritzon, the Parliament majority wanted to have a resolution that was critical of Qatar. You and your party comrade Erik Bergson voted against that idea. I'd just like to know why. I'd like to know why the Social Democrats in Sweden were in favour of visa-free travel for Qatar, whereas the Centre Party, who are not known for their such policies, voted against.
Herr Ordförande.
President, this question from Charlie Weymouth, my answer to that would be that Charlie Weymouth knows very well that we voted on formal points on the agenda. When it came to the resolution, however, I can tell you very clearly that I, as a Social Democrat, together with my group, stood behind the rights of workers, women and girls' rights, and we do that each and every occasion when we take important decisions contrary to Charlie Weymouth himself.
Ďakujem veľmi pekne a ďalšia vystúpi pani Katalin.
Thank you very much. And Katalin Czech is next.
Thank you, Chair. Dear colleagues, Qatar's attempt to buy influence in the European Parliament is absolutely outrageous. But it also confronts us with a very grim reality. Authoritarian countries are actively trying to infiltrate European institutions, and let's face it, our safeguards are just not up for the task right now. We knew this was the case in the European Council, where Viktor Orban has been using his vetoes along the interests of Russia or China, undermining Europe. And now we see that foreign influence has reached this parliament as well. And it must have very far-reaching consequences. We need very urgent reform in ethics and lobbying frameworks, and we need a much better vetting system in foreign policy personnel as well. And our message to Qatar must be crystal clear. Attempts to silence us and to buy the European Parliament will never succeed. We will never turn our back on human rights violations, or on the thousands of workers who have died while constructing stadiums for their World Cup of shame. In fact, all Qatar achieved with their bribe money was that we will fight twice as hard to make sure that there will be some consequences. Thank you very much.
Ďakujem veľmi pekne a ďalší vystúpi.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Eric Marquardt.
Ja, vielen Dank, Herr Präsident.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Corruption is toxic for democracy, as many people have said. The European Parliament is quite clearly suffering from the poison. I've talked to a lot of people over the past days, and it's good that most people are saying that this is not just a few bad apples, and certainly the people are not saying this is just a problem of one political group. The most important thing is that while there may be a small number of guilty people, but the scale of the problem is a big one. And it's not just Qatar. There are other countries which are a threat to democracy. And we have to look at what we can do better as an institution. How can we improve our transparency rules? And what can we do to make sure that our transparency rules are actually respected? There are members who for 3 years haven't reported any meetings with lobbyists. That has to change. It's not just changing the rules. We've got rules. What can we do to enforce them? What can we do to improve law enforcement? What can we do gradually to start rebuilding trust? Thank you.
Ďakujem veľmi pekne a ďalší.
Thank you very much. And the next speaker is Jaak Madison.
Suur aitäh, eesistuja.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, Commissioner, colleagues. The Belgian police has done some good work. Well done. 600,000 euro in plastic bags in European Parliament apartments. That's good work, but it's probably just the tip of the iceberg. It seems that several S&D members of Parliament have something to do with Qatari corruption, but there's probably more to it than that. Corruption is a serious problem we have to combat, but there's a whiff of corruption in what the Commission President has been doing. The Parliament has expressed its concern about the deletion of text messages and WhatsApp messages from the Commission President's phone. Exchanges about 3.5 billion worth of taxpayers' money with Pfizer. Unfortunately, the European Commission is brushing this under the carpet. If we really want to fight corruption, we have to stop this secrecy. As the Ombudsman O'Reilly has said, if you are secretive, then there will be suspicion. It's high time that something be done about this. Thank you.
Ďakujem veľmi pekne a ďalší.
Thank you very much. And Vincenzo Sofo is next.
Al di là dell'aspetto giudiziario.
Of course, there is the whole aspect of justice, and it's the hand of the judges, but this is also a political case that we cannot ignore. The lobbies have huge power and huge influence here in the European Parliament, whether it's multinationals, foreign countries, or NGOs. Qatargate shows that the NGO issue is something that we have to pay particular attention to. Look at most of the proposals that come to the committees to see how much pressure is put on us to make sure that these pseudo-humanitarian organizations bring their influence to bear on the decision-making. There were very ambiguous cases, such as the conflict of interest between the NGOs and European Court of Human Rights. Now, they have an impact on the daily life of democracy without enough information and which interests they support. I think that the Committee of Inquiry on Qatargate is necessary, but not enough. If we want the European institutions to get their transparency and credibility back, then we have to make sure that opaque lobbies don't have a hold on the Parliament anymore, and make sure that only those who have the mandate of the people can do the work they do.
Thank you very much. And the next speaker is Kostas Papadakis.
The womb that engenders corruption is the European Union itself, the EU of big capital. And of course, we have the Kaili case, which also involves other present and former MEPs. Your resolution whitewashing Qatar was adopted without a roll call vote. The EU, the EPP, and the Social Democrats seem to talk about exemplary labor reforms, and this on the graves of those who died. And of course, this was backed by the ITUC head, who is now being prosecuted. Now, you talk about Qatar being strategic partners, and you talked about visa waivers, but now all of a sudden they've become an authoritarian regime that attacks European democracy. So you've now discovered this while standing next to this mire, and we've got these suspicious NGOs. But now, even though you've discarded that, now you're giving us new myths and stories about ethics, codes, good lobbies, transparency. The peoples have to draw their own conclusions. The EU and the rotten capitalist system cannot be reformed, only overthrown by the people's struggles. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Brando Benifei. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, President. The investigation is bringing deplorable facts to light, and the European Parliament needs to stand united and decide on what has to be done. I'm furious and upset about the fact that former MEPs, current MEPs, and assistants that have been colleagues of ours for many years have been involved in this. But of course, justice will take its course. And I would like to say that any attempt to bring influence to bear on my parliamentary group will fail. Our delegation, even within our political group, decided to vote in favor of the left's amendments, boosting the whole issue of workers' rights, which is the right throughout. We also put two questions over the last few months about the World Cup to Vice President Borrell. We'll take all the necessary initiatives in order to make sure the truth comes to the fore and that we talk about our work and the battles we carry out. We need a new anti-corruption law with the Commissioner at the helm. We need to have an independent European body responsible for ethics. We've discussed this with other political groups and that have been against, but I hope they will change their minds. We really have to do this properly to make sure that it's not the interests of a few that prevail. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is Valérie Ayer.
Thank you very much, President, Commissioner, ladies and gentlemen. There's been foreign interference in our parliament. There have been Russian attacks on in the line of cyber terrorism, and now we see that Qatar has managed to influence our members through votes and policies. It's no more, no less than corruption. It seems that some people here ignore the moral imperative of their mandate. So yes, we need transparency. But as bad as these acts of interference are, the acts of individuals are putting at risk the faith in our institutions. Corruption has no place in our institutions, and this is why I would not hesitate to waive immunity if necessary. Facing corruption, our group, Renew, will be intransigent. It will also be intransigent in the reforms that need to be carried out so that this is never seen again. We need to have more transparency. Since 1999, we've been pushing for this, Commissioner. This was a promise from Ursula von der Leyen, and we are now ready. Thank you.
Madam Aubry has requested a blue card. So please, the floor is yours. She can refuse? No, she can't. Under the new rules, yeah, she doesn't need to okay the blue card, so you have the floor, Madam Aubry. Yeah? It could be a statement.
Bon, merci, Monsieur.
Well, thank you very much, President. I thought I'd be able to put the question to Valérie Ayer, who's refusing to field it. I'm going to put it nevertheless. It'll remain with a question mark at the end of it. Maybe she'll be able to resolve my concerns. I do share indignation against this biggest scandal of corruption. It's unprecedented. I have a couple of questions. First of all, how do you explain that Emmanuel Macron said in this context just a few weeks ago that this World Cup bears testimony to changes afoot and that Qatar is going along the right path and they can count on our support? That was his tweet, in fact, word for word. Secondly, given this context, how can Emmanuel Macron accept to go to Qatar, not boycott it, and support this in this way, a government which is in the process of corrupting our parliament? I'm afraid I'm not going to get an answer to those.
Thank you very much. And next we're going to hear from Heidi Hautala.
So, colleagues, some have already pointed out that stricter ethics rules would not have prevented the kind of serious criminal acts that we have now seen. But I want to convince you that lax rules, on the other hand, can create opportunities for corruption. An organisational culture that turns a blind eye to smaller indiscretions of members only serves to enable more serious abuses of office. The Parliament has been until now light-handed in dealing with dodgy friendship groups, false electoral observation missions and questionable use of members' allowances. The free mandate of an MEP is not an excuse to act against the core values of our Union. The proposed committee of inquiry must have a strong mandate for far-reaching reforms to protect this House from undue foreign influence and other abuses of power. Importantly, new rules on members' conduct must include enforcement and sanctions. Until now, they are just symbolic. And back in 2021, may I remind you, I wrote a letter to President Sassoli together with colleague Glucksmann and made concrete proposals on undue foreign influence. We received no reply. The threat of foreign influence must now finally be taken seriously.
Ďakujem veľmi pekne. From Madam Melchior. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Heidi Hautala. You mentioned that you wrote a letter in 2021 to the President of the Parliament with concrete proposals. Could you elaborate on what the concrete proposals were in that letter? Thank you very much.
Thank you for your question, colleague Melchior. First of all, the simple thing that we could have done on that day, we could still do today, is that we oblige foreign embassies and diplomats and other foreign actors to be registered in the transparency register. And then, of course, this question of wild, unauthorized election observation should be tackled, because we have in our rules the protection of the dignity of the Parliament. So members should not be allowed in activities that damage the reputation of the Parliament, and we should give a broad interpretation to this, including electoral observations missions that only are in favour of strengthening autocrats that we don't want as an institution to defend.
Ďakujem veľmi pekne. Thank you very much. Ďalší vystúpi pán.
The next speaker is Carlos Puigdemont. You have the floor.
Chair, there is a political culture in Europe and in certain countries of the Union which consist of increasing leniency towards human rights violations as trade exchange increase. Qatar-friendly Europe is an example of this political culture, as are the lucrative relation between Spain and the regime of Saudi Arabia. One only needs to see the sympathy and praise of Commissioner Skinas every time he has met with Qatari representatives to understand what the official narrative is. When economic interests water down the demand for respect for human rights, the door to corruption opens a little more. Maybe we should try to be less friendly and more demanding. Thank you.
Thank you. And the next speaker is Nikos Androulakis.
First of all, congratulations to the Belgian authorities that revealed this scandal. Unlike others that are trying to cover up scandals, no one has the right to put the Parliament in this position. We have to protect transparency and democracy. We shouldn't become an example to avoid. That is why when I heard about this shocking case, as soon as I heard this, I immediately threw Mrs. Kaili out of the party. We cannot say that we're all the same. We have to prove this with our actions. So the time for action has come. And that is why I suggest, number one, to not allow European officials during their term of office to become a lobbyist. We have a special service that helped MEPs check whether there was spyware on their phones. I suggest that already tomorrow morning we have a special body that will check all the assets of MEPs and how they got those assets. We need to go through all of this with a fine-tooth comb. These two actions will help shed light on the situation and will make sure that there isn't a trace of shadow hanging over this House. We owe it to the citizens we represent and the European dream. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Karen Melchior has the floor.
Thank you very much, President. Thank you, Commissioner. The extent of the alleged corruption is criminal. It must be prosecuted, and we must investigate how we can do better. However, no matter how good the rules are, there will always be criminals who take the risk and the suitcase of Euro notes. But we can make stronger rules. We need to clean up our act in the European Parliament. We need to do away with informal friendship groups outside the rules of the Parliament, replace them with regulated interpolitical groups. We need to extend our transparency register to representatives of foreign governments and former MEPs. Thank you, colleagues and Commissioner, for your support for an ethics body with investigative powers for all EU institutions, which Renew Europe has called for since 2019. And rules cannot stand alone. We must not accept colleagues being unduly influenced to change wordings, votes, and legislation. To help expose criminality, we must make our whistleblower system stronger. And finally, to my colleagues, if you see something that seems odd or out of line with previous opinions or known facts, then do something. Confront your colleagues and even your political leadership. It is a joint responsibility to prevent the corruption of the few. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now Ernest Urtasun has the floor.
Thank you very much. My first words are to thank and support Belgian justice and the Belgian police for uncovering this very serious case of corruption. Of course, the main responsible parties are those who allow themselves to be corrupted and those who did the corrupting. But we cannot think that this is just an isolated case that doesn't affect the institution. It has affected the image of the European Parliament, especially at a difficult time where people are finding it very hard. And this means that people feel even more disaffected and increase the disillusion in the institutions. Now, but let us be careful. Let us make sure we deal with this properly. It would be a mistake to just replace Mrs. Kaili as Vice President. That would be superficial. We need a root and branch reform of our transparency rules. The Parliament cannot still be the weak link in the system. We need very deep reform of how we carry out our work.
Thank you. And the next speaker is Dino Giarrusso.
Presidente, colleghi,
President, ladies and gentlemen, what a disgrace. It's a terrible disgrace in this House. How many billions does this House cost us? How much does it cost each and every citizen? How many billions do we cost people? We're talking about the dreams and hopes of a better life. European citizens place their trust for these in us. We have betrayed them, and the pact of trust has been tarnished. We're talking about bags of banknotes in the homes of colleagues, former colleagues, trade unions. It just reminds you of the money that the mafia has. Heaps of money. It's a disgrace. Today is a terrible day, and President Metsola and everyone below her, please take action. Not just words, but action. We need to fight against corruption. We need stringent rules. We need to punish those who are guilty today, but make sure that we create the right conditions so that in the future no one can steal the future of Europeans, their trust and their money. Let us throw out everyone who is corrupt and who's corrupting from this House and make sure that there is no possibility in the future of doing this. Otherwise, there will be no raison d'être for the European Parliament.
Thank you very much. Raphael Glucksmann is next.
Chers collègues,
ladies and gentlemen, we are completely shamed by this, and we mustn't be intransigent. We have to act. We've seen that there are old things that have come back to haunt us here. Mr. Spinelli gave us a direction to follow to fight impunity. We have to really move in that direction. We have to have a committee of inquiry. We have to have a high authority that is responsible for transparency in public life. We need to make sure that elites in Europe are not captured by foreign actors. What we need to find today, or re-find, is courage. The courage to counter these foreign countries, be they China, Russia, or Qatar, who do their shopping in our democracy. We, as members and chair of this, our investigative committee, a special committee, have been pushing this point. Europe is not for sale.
Ďakujem veľmi pekne. Ďalší.
Thank you very much. And the next speaker is Iorios Kyrtsos. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, President. Mrs. Kaili has been stripped of her vice presidency, but she was helped by strong interest in Greece in her political career, interests that have a hold on the media, and she was also helped by lobbies in the European institutions. Her career and her fall are an example that we need to get inspiration from when it comes to new rules. We have to make sure that we curb these interests. Now, the foreign influence, including Qatar's, who thinks that it can buy anything, has to be curtailed drastically. We need to be self-critical. The Italian socialists gave her so many opportunities, and evaluators who always thought her scientific proposals and applications for funding were excellent, and all those who promoted the products of digital giants with Mrs. Kaili at the helm, please don't kid yourselves. It's not only Qatar, ladies and gentlemen.
Ďakujem veľmi pekne. Ďalší vystúpi.
Thank you. The next speaker is Munir Satouri.
Chers collègues,
colleagues, the corruption scandal which is shaking this institution is of the worst kind. This corruption sought to silence this House on human rights. Many authoritarian regimes meddle in Europe's democracy. They seek to achieve their objectives, to buy an image. This time it was Qatar, with its World Cup built on exploited workers. For years, we have been asking for measures to be taken. We are calling for a European ethics authority and a committee of inquiry up to the task. We need to have the dissuasive measures in place, there will always be corruption. That is why you need anti-corruption measures. But I say to the corruptors, the way to create an image of yourselves is to respect people's rights and not by buying the votes of members. Thank you very much. Francesca Donato is the next speaker.
Thank you, President. Madam Commissioner, ladies and gentlemen, the serious corruption charges that have emerged surrounding MEPs, assistants, have caused shock among us. I think that the rules pertaining to lobbying and transparency are not enough to prevent corruption, but that's not just here in the European Parliament, but that also applies to the European Commission. The President of the European Commission is also being looked into, given the whole issue of public procurement of vaccines. But I haven't heard anyone utter any words of indignation. No one has asked her to stand down. Giants such as Pfizer or digital lobbies or defense lobbies, do you think that they have less influence and power than Qatar and that they can't really influence our decisions to their benefit? We need to have a committee of inquiry. We owe this to our citizens, and they need to look at what I've just talked about and not just Qatar.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Agnes Jongerius.
Thank you very much, President. Well, indeed, it does seem a bit like a surrealist Netflix film, but when you wake up, you realize that it's actually reality, cold, hard reality. Ladies and gentlemen, in our parliament and in NGOs, there's been corruption. In our worst dreams, I don't think we ever would have thought up such a scenario. Trust in European democracy has been undermined. And I think the only thing we can do here is condemn this in no uncertain terms. There's no place for corruption, not now, not ever. But at the same time, it is not the time to just come out with fine words. We have to come out with acts and deeds, and those deeds have to start at home, which means alongside setting up our own committee of inquiry, I would urge that we establish an independent investigation into these incidents. And at the same time, I would say we need to support the call for a revision of the rules to look, first of all, at the third countries that have untrammeled access to the European Parliament. It's time for actions, time for deeds. Thank you.
Ďakujem veľmi pekne a ďalší vystúpi pán Daniel Freund.
Thank you very much. Daniel Freund is next. Colleagues, corruption is the greatest threat to our democracy. Corruption is criminal, and people with sackloads of cash belong in prison. But for the European Parliament, this issue will not be over when the Belgian authorities have finished their work. There are some people in this House who don't seem to understand what a member can and cannot do. How is it possible that members of this House let ruthless dictators pay for their trips? How is it that some members don't publish their meetings with lobbyists? How is it that members face no penalties despite repeatedly breaching the rules of the House? Colleagues, I've really had enough. There are a few bad apples here who are dragging the image of this House into the mire. Meetings should be declared, including meetings with Qataris, and the lobbying rules have to be enforced. Otherwise, the next scandal is just going to be around the corner. This is the time to act. Now we can do something.
Ďakujem veľmi pekne a teraz nasleduje.
Thank you very much. Now we have the catch the eye procedure. And we have Maria Walsh as the first speaker.
I know it's shocking to read news of police investigations into the work of an elected official and staff of the Parliament. It is shocking to me and incredibly shocking to our EU citizens. And it is important that due process is followed. Today in Strasbourg, I, along with 624 MEPs, voted for an early termination of the office of Vice President of the Parliament, Eva Kaili. The public should be able and needs to be able to trust the work of us MEPs and the Parliament staff. At the end of the day, we are elected by the public, for the public, to carry out our work in public interest and are answerable to the people. That is our job. Corruption of any nature has no place in our political landscape here or in our member state. I welcome any internal investigations and improved procedures to uphold the reputation of our EU institutions. We need to be transparent, to be accountable and to do what is right. I stand for a strong Europe, a fair Europe and a trusted Europe. Thank you very much.
Ďakujem veľmi pekne a teraz vystúpi pán.
Thank you. The next speaker is Juan Fernando López Aguilar.
Thank you very much. Commissioner Johansson, the European Parliament was the first parliament in the world to protect whistleblowers. And the European Parliament has really come down hard against corruption and money laundering. And that is why the European Parliament has to stand united. There mustn't be any cracks when it comes to condemning those who have corrupted and those who have been corrupted. Of course, the judicial procedure is happening, but we also have to make sure that we protect our integrity and transparency, the most accessible and transparent parliament of the world. But we also have to rally behind the condemnation of anyone who shows, because they're being prosecuted, that they never deserved the trust that were put in them. Because it is a duty and something of dignity to represent the European people in this House. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Viola von Kramon-Taubadel is the next speaker.
Transparenz, Integrität.
Transparency, integrity, anti-corruption, fairness and human rights. For months now we've been speaking about these topics, especially in conjunction with Qatar. FIFA and football, first of all, now our democracy in Europe. But the demands have remained the same. We have to work for our values together. We as an institution have to work against the undue influence of others. We need to look a little closer and be accountable. Millions for sports washing, greenwashing with FIFA, now 25 million for social washing with the ILO. It's just a question of time before we start finding more receipts. Qatar has money. They want to buy themselves a better image, but the EU's not for sale. And there will be consequences for all of those who are happy to have a price tag.
Ďakujem pekne a ďalší výstup.
Thank you very much. Gert Bourgeois is the next speaker.
Thank you very much, President. Ladies and gentlemen, as with all of you, I'm deeply shocked by the incident that we're seeing here. I'm very pleased that the police have acted very powerfully and an independent judiciary in action. We have to, I think, review our rules on transparency and openness, but I would warn against having an interinstitutional ethics body comprised of third parties who are meant to be independent to check whether we're implementing our own rules. We should not allow ourselves to be controlled and monitored, scrutinized by another body out with the European Parliament. We are here as a monitoring, scrutinizing body, not the other way around. We have to work through this by strengthening and bolstering our own code of conduct.
Ďakujem veľmi pekne a ďalšia.
Thank you very much. Leila Scheibik is the next speaker.
Plus d'1 million.
More than €1.5 million in cash fish. That's 94 years on your minimum wage. So a couple working for years wouldn't make the amount of money that Qatar used to corrupt Europeans. So most of us weren't given suitcases full of banknotes. But we know what fishing is all about. Fishing is a technique used giving us baits as if we were fish. I got this in my parliament mailbox yesterday. I was invited to go to one of the most luxurious hotels in Brussels by the Qatar embassy 2 weeks before. I was invited to go to Qatar itself and to visit the stadia and to meet the trade unions and to see how Qatar had adopted a set of measures in order to reinforce social protection and labor conditions. So we really need to deal with the root causes of this so that unbridled lobbying and corruption are no longer like a fish in water in the European Parliament.
Ďakujem veľmi pekne a ako ďalší...
Thank you very much. Lukáš Kohut is the next speaker.
Parlamencie Europejskim.
There are no sacred cows in the European Parliament. A vice president arrested. What does the union do? First, cooperate with the authorities. Second, strip her of her rights. Third, remove her as vice president. Fourth, a debate in plenary and a resolution. The EU has reacted. There is no easy ride for those who have betrayed Europe's values, because that's what it's about in rule of law. You have to react. If people break the law, you have to act, because everyone is equal. There are things that people have forgotten about what happened in Poland in the past. I think you need to learn from what Europe is doing. Zero tolerance to corruption, zero tolerance of breaking the law.
Ďakujem veľmi pekne a ďalšia vystúpi.
Thank you very much. Ana Miranda has the floor.
Qué escándalo. Es que no se puede.
What a scandal. You cannot do business with politics. What do some MEPs think they are? Do they think they're gods? We represent our peoples. We don't peddle votes and influence. Ethics, responsibility, work integrity, and transparency are extremely important and should be part and parcel of our mandate. Our political group have often denounced corruption. We've often said that we are being contacted by lobbies, and the big groups didn't do anything. There's foreign influence by countries such as Israel, Turkey, Morocco, and Qatar. This is nothing new, ladies and gentlemen. We demand a committee of inquiry, and we demand zero tolerance against corruption. To be honest, I'm extremely surprised that the Spanish PP isn't represented here in the chamber. I'm very surprised. M. Rajoy.
Ďakujem veľmi pekne a ďalší.
Thank you. Petros Koukoulis is the next speaker.
Thank you, President. As we see photographs of piles of cash found in the hands of members of our European Parliament community, how can citizens not wonder how much money is there that we don't see? It is really existential for the integrity of our House to immediately and radically reform our governance structure and provide the transparency and accountability that the citizens we represent demand and deserve. And we must start this week, tomorrow I think, with a resolution that will demonstrate credibly our commitment to take concrete measures, many proposed by previous speakers, to bring our House in order and give us the opportunity to rebuild the trust that is necessary to perform our real duty, to exercise parliamentary scrutiny over the Commission and the Council, and to resist not only foreign interference, but also domestic interference. Thank you very much.
Ďakujem veľmi pekne.
Thank you very much. Diana Ribarigina is the next speaker.
Thank you very much, President. Commissioner. The Qatar Gate information is serious, especially since it rocks the foundations of any democracy, and that is the people's trust. There's something we must never forget. We are all here in this chamber for the same unique reason. It's because the citizens have placed their trust in us. The images of the police taking suitcases away with hundreds of thousands of euro from MEPs and others working for the institution is not only a disgrace for us, but it also disgusts us deeply. We have to be implacable. Let us set up a committee of inquiry. Let us set up an independent ethics body that can investigate all EU institutions. Let us put an end to donations from third countries for political foundations and MEPs. Let us make sure that we have a transition period for former MEPs whose term comes to an end so that they don't peddle their influence for the same reasons we've seen here. Zero tolerance for corruption and zero tolerance of those who have been corrupted.
Thank you very much. And that brings to a conclusion the Catch the Eye procedure. And now we're going to hear from Commissioner Ylva Johansson to conclude on behalf of the European Commission.
Thank you, President. Thank you, members of this Parliament. Thank you for this very important debate, and thank you for channeling your anger and frustration into firm commitment to do what's necessary to rebuild trust. There must be zero tolerance for corruption. It's a very serious crime that undermines our democracy, economy and society. And as a union, we need to learn the hard lessons and take responsibility. This scandal we discuss here today goes well beyond ethics violations. It's a criminal investigation. Even though we urgently need the EU ethics body for all European institutions, this is a criminal investigation. And the only way we can rebuild trust is to fully support these investigations, for the guilty to be brought to justice, and for us to root out corruption anywhere we find it. And finally, let me say that our debate today also gives me hope. The strong words spoken on condemnation, the demand for justice and action. We are at the beginning of a struggle that will be long and hard. Bringing the guilty to justice will be comparatively the easy part. Rebuilding trust, that will be hard. Let's be honest about this. To do that, our fight against corruption must be unrelenting, uncompromising, unforgiving. In our union, in our member states, and in our institutions, to show everyone it's not this scandal that defines us, but our resolve, determination and action to do everything it takes to do what is right. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and that concludes the debate. The vote will take place on Thursday. The next item on the order paper is Council and Commission statements. The recent JHA Council decision on Schengen accession, and first we're going to hear from Minister Vladimír Balaš on behalf of Council.
Ďakujem, pán prezident. Mr. President, Madam Commissioner,